Next week, I'm going to the Principal's First Conference or Summit in Washington to talk about what we do going forward here in the U.S. And because I'm conscious that this is the first time I will be going to a gathering of what I think of as Republicans, and having not been a Republican all my life, I'm really I'm a little apprehensive, I must admit, which led me to think about my early days with the Green Party and thinking this is an interesting trajectory. That was back after my first book, Home Ecology, was published. I was asked to be a speaker on women's issues for the Green Party, and typical of a Green Party, they didn't consider the fact that I couldn't even vote in the country. And I really did. I'm not a meetings person at all, and I had a very small baby. So I was certainly not very active, but one thing I did do in 1990 was speak on behalf of the UK Green Party at an event in Colorado. It was chance that I could do that. I had just moved for a period to Boulder because the U.S. edition of my book, Home Ecology, was being published in the States, and I decided to try a little re-entry. And the Green Committees of Correspondence, which was the kind of precursor to the U.S. Green Party, was having a big conference in Rocky Mountain National Park just about the time I arrived. So it was a nice bit of synchronicity. What I need to say, though, is that the Green Party was then a rather odd organization trying to pull something together internationally. That was certainly a challenge. But Britain was very much a star at that point because they had won in the European elections. That was the early days of Britain being part of the European Union. The Green Party in the UK had won 15% of the vote. So they were riding high, as you'll hear in the short clip from my presentation at Rocky Mountain National Park. But that led to all kinds of complications. And I'm going to tell you after you hear that 1990 clip about some of the people who were there and what's happened. And this really matters because in the U.S., there is now a U.S. Green Party that fields a candidate even in the presidential election. And this has had an effect on the results of the election, to the extent that in the 2024 election, a few days before Donald Trump was elected president, the European Green parties called upon the U.S. Green Party and Jill Stein, who was the candidate, to withdraw and support the Democratic Party candidate. The U.S. Green Party has, as far as I can see, gone right off the rails. And perhaps we can see from when I tell you about what's happened with some of the other folks who've been involved in the party. I would love to see an effective Green Party. And there are Green Party politicians in the world who are really admirable people. So I'm not trying to dismiss them entirely, but there's some others. One of them in the UK, worth noting, was a man called David Icke, who was a fairly well-known football player. And I believe he did radio commentary as well. So he was fairly well known and decided to take up the Green cause. And the Green Party, in its wisdom, decided to, because of his prominence, to appoint him as a co-leader of the party with my friend Sarah Parkin, who was an extremely competent person. She could go on the radio or the television and represent the Green Party in a way that was very dignified and authoritative and persuasive. David Icke was a different kind of character, and you'd think it might be appealing to have a football player there. But it wasn't long after that he decided he was also Jesus. And this led to an endless succession of conspiracy theories and various personal dramas that played out very well in the press, and certainly did the Green Party no service. And I remember when my next Green book was published, The Green Home, in 1995, I was over in Britain and doing some radio interviews, and I had to follow David Icke, who had a new book out. It was the last book of his, I believe, published by a mainstream publisher. He's self-published since then because he has become an anti-Semite, and I don't know. There's a long, if you're interested in how people kind of go off the rails, the Wikipedia article on David Icke is certainly an instructive story. But anyway, I had to go on and try and sound sensible and persuasive about environmental issues, following on from him, which was not such fun. But you will hear a little bit about what was going on in the Green Party, and after that, I will fill you in on a few of the people and a few of the things that have happened since then.
My name is Ross Mercarimi, and I'm co-coordinator of the International Working Group, which is been in existence for roughly about a year now. We had decided that it was best to foster relations with the Greens that we have known of in Europe as soon as we possibly could to help gain a sense of legitimacy for the Green movement that is building here in the United States and examine and investigate the Green movement that was building strong momentum throughout Europe. In December of 1989, both Mindy Lorenz and myself joined Phil Hill and introduced the U.S. Greens to the Brussels Conference of European Greens. What that did for us was opened our eyes to many, many issues that I think many of us were unaware of, helped put in perspective the way the Green movement is building in Western Europe, the way that the Green movement is amazingly building in Eastern Europe, demystify the things that we really went over there not knowing, and allow us to come back with the inspiration to try to put in focus and accelerate the kind of green program that many of us would like to see here.
At this point, Ross introduced the speakers and said we would each be speaking for about 10 minutes. I seem to be the only person who kept to that limit. In fact, the others went way long. So you're just going to get about 8 minutes of me talking extremely quickly and sounding as if I just run a half marathon. I was very nervous, obviously. But the points I make about what was going on in Britain at the time, I think, are worth having here. So here goes.
Something already about the success of the British Green Party. And their success has been terrific. After the 15% they received in the European elections last year, the media has taken a completely new interest in the Green Party there. And I'm always delighted when I watch the evening news in Britain to see that the Tories are blue, the Labour Party is red. And this is when they do an opinion poll. The yellow is for the old Liberal Party. And then, fortunately, the Green Party has another colour, which comes at the bottom. And they're always there now. They have the terrific disadvantage of being understaffed, to the extent that they really are not able to cope with the kind of media attention that they receive. And at the moment, there are only 3 paid members at the Green Party office. And when you think that they're being treated very frequently by the media as the 4th party in Britain, and Britain is used to having more than 2 parties, the situation is something that is quite dire for them. I'm an American, and I want to offer a few observations about some of the lessons that the American Green movement might learn from the British Greens. And I just wanted to say that one of the nicest things for me coming back to the States after 10 years is to come here to a place where there is a lot of interest in international affairs and in the Green movement in other places, and an interest and a desire to learn from people in other places, because it's not a great American gift to want to learn from the people of other parts of the world. So anyway, it's really terrific to be here. I appreciate that, and I want you all to appreciate that that's something very, very special about the Green movement. there are debates raging here that are very similar to some of the debates raging in Britain. I write a lot at the moment about consumerism and green consumerism, and one of the things that happens there is that people tend to fall into two camps. They tend to dismiss all this stuff about changing products or adopting different ways of doing things in the home. This 50 simple things you can do. They either adopt that as sufficient in and of itself, which is very convenient for government and for the large corporations, or they dismiss it entirely as being completely irrelevant. And I think this is one of the cases where we need to accept that both real political and institutional change is essential, and practical changes in the way we live are essential. And I'm pointing this out because there's a lot of debate about whether the green movement is going to grow through grassroots organization or through the development of a national political structure. And I don't see that the two are mutually incompatible. The two things can happen at the same time. There's this saying about neither right nor left. I think it's neither black nor white. We need to think about doing both. Some of the advantages of having a political party that I've been reflecting on as I've been here is that the British Green Party, for example, and there are plenty of contentious issues. There is lots of debate. There are lots of difficulties within the British Green Party. But they still managed to produce things like this. This is the 87 election manifesto. It is written, it is not an internal document. This is a document that goes out to the people who are going to vote. It sets out the Green position on all kinds of issues in very, very succinct and clear English, which means that if you are asking a voter to vote for you, you can explain what the party position is. And someone said to me, well, how on earth do they manage to pull that together? And I think it's because an election date is set, and it's like when I write a piece of journalism, having a deadline is terrific. It gets you down to the wire. And politics has deadlines, and that can be very, very useful. Politics also gives a movement some of the media attention that can be helpful. I mean, there's a lot of debate about sort of what kind of media coverage, what media coverage does. I mean, the media in Britain is quite ridiculous at times and takes the opportunity to run displays, run big spreads about the green wedding of the year with, attempt between two environmentalists, you see. And unfortunately, they sometimes fall right into it. And the media sometimes, they take great delight in poking fun at all this. But when you have candidates running for election, they do have the ear of the media, and therefore the ear of a lot of people who would not otherwise hear about the green movement, who are very interested, who are concerned about many of the issues that we're concerned about, but who, for one reason or another, partly because of the way the media here is so dominated by, the green movement just does not get into the mainstream media here, which it does in Britain. I mean, the Times and the Telegraph, they all cover the Green Party. Not very nicely sometimes, but it's there. And the people who read the Times and the Telegraph know it's there. And that's a good thing. The other thing that political action does for each and every one of us is it develops our communication skills. Because we get so, in any movement, you tend to spend so much time talking to other people who understand your language that you don't necessarily get the opportunity to you don't do the going around on doorsteps and chatting to the little old lady who doesn't who doesn't know what the Green Party is, but who certainly, if you are able to articulate the ideas of the Green movement well, is quite likely to agree with you on many issues. And that is an essential and important thing. I think something that we all desperately need. And I'll just say one last thing, which is a little bit a sort of stray comment, but I've just loved being here. I've just come back to the States after about 10 years. And I just think that being in this setting is wonderful. But I've heard some people complaining about being in such a nice place and that we should be in the inner city. And I noticed that when we were driving up here, that there were people who were noticing landfill sites and this sort of thing. And I started to think about the way if I know there was a workshop on healthcare today, I wasn't able to go, but one of the criticisms of conventional medicine is often that it only looks at disease. And it's very easy for people concerned about the environment and about social justice issues to concentrate only on what is wrong and to concentrate on the disease and never look at the beautiful world that we are trying to protect and to find a real vision for the future, for the kind of society that we want to develop. And if we just look at the disease and what's wrong and don't find a vision, a shared vision, then we're never going to succeed at the things that we want to do.
I made several friends at that conference, and a couple of them went on to elected office. I'm sad to say the story is not the trajectory that I would like to report. I did notice that a woman who was there, an older woman, only recently died. Dee Berry is referred to as the grandmother of the U.S. Greens in an obituary, and I remember her very fondly. One of my friends from that conference, the person who introduced us that day, Ross Mercarini, ran for sheriff in San Francisco and won and was the sheriff. But he was then accused of domestic violence and pleaded guilty to misdemeanor false imprisonment of his wife and ended up with a whole series of scandals, unfortunately, that led to his being dismissed by the mayor. And again, not exactly a useful thing for the U.S. Greens. Another very pleasant guy I met there and then saw later in California was Mike Feinstein, and he became the mayor of Santa Monica for a couple of years and still seems to be active with the U.S. Green Party, which does exist but has taken direction that I think is most unfortunate. One of the things with Green parties is that as their ideas become adopted by the mainstream parties, this happened in the UK, even with the Conservatives, because there's not the anti-climate change thing that we have in the States. So the Conservative Party, the Tories, the Labour Party, the Social and Liberal Democrats or Liberal Party, they all took on an environmental message, which of course, in a way is a great success, but it leaves a Green Party hanging a bit and struggling to find a path. And one wonders, should they really just fold into the mainstream party or stay outside it to be an influence? I did write an article for the Encyclopedia of Leadership about Green parties in general. The US and the UK parties are not the only one with some rather newsworthy, I'm not sure you'd always call them a scandal, but certainly some personal dramas that seem to interfere with the workings of the political organizations. And you may find that interesting. And I'm going to put in the show notes, I'll put links to some of the people I've mentioned and incidents I've mentioned, as well as a link to that article on the history of the Green parties and the role of leadership in developing a Green Party or an environmentally focused political movement. Thanks. Thank you for joining me at The Way We Live Now, a podcast where we roam the world for ideas and inspiration and talk about tools that will help to make the world a better place. I'd really love to have your ideas and comments. Please leave a comment below and subscribe to the feed. You can sign up for my newsletter, which I try to make a real letter, at KarenChristensen.substack.com.